Today we're here at the largest battle site of the Civil War in Indian Territory. On a hot summer day, July 17th, 1863, nearly 6,000 Confederate troops traveling north on the Texas Road on their way to ambush Union forces at Fort Gibson, where they were met with nearly around 3,000 Union troops here at the battle, what we call Honey Springs. The battle's significance being the most diverse battle in Indian Territory, with all the 5 tribes in this battle, along with the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry. With it being the largest battle of the Civil War, many battle sites took here in Indian Territory, such as Round Mountain, Boggy Depot, and many others. Today we're here to uncover a lot of the truth of how this battle took place, and seeing it from the Seminole perspective also. The Seminoles that were in the Indian Home Guard, the 1st and 2nd. So Adam, kind of fill us in a little bit about Honey Springs. What took place here?
So the engagement or the Battle of Honey Springs would have taken place on what would have been a very hot, muggy July 17th, 1863 day, just 2 weeks after Union victories in the east at Gettysburg and the west at Vicksburg. And then here at Honey Springs, within the Trans-Mississippi Theater of the Civil War, the largest of over 100 documented Civil War conflicts to take place in what is now Oklahoma, then Indian Territory. Those of the Seminole Nation that fought here at the Battle of Honey Springs mostly fought for the 1st Indian Home Guard and the 2nd Indian Home Guard. There were 2 companies that fought for the 1st Indian Home Guard, and they were placed on the right flank for the Union forces, and they were next to the 6th Kansas, and they made several assaults at the Cherokee troops that were here, taking on the Confederate Cherokees, and they would have taken that left flank and paved the way for victory here at Honey Springs.
Involvement of the Seminole Nation, we fought on both sides. You have involvement of all the 5 tribes here at the battle. You have the Seminoles, the Chickasaws, and the Skokie Creeks, the Cherokees, and the Choctaws. The Seminoles are divided on this battlefield, fighting on with the Confederates and the Union. One famous Seminole that was with the Confederate Army was by the name of John Jumper. On the Union, you have a man by the name of John Chupko. Those are the 2 biggest names in the Civil War for the Seminole Nation in the Civil War, going into our history of that. And of course, you got other people that are part of that. People like Pascofa that were leading up to Kansas, trying to evade the war with the Hobithi-Ohola, evading to Fort Row, Kansas in the Freed Territory. And sadly, he has Seminoles that died there at Fort Row in that territory. So our involvement going down there, and so it's kind of just, we're kind of caught in the crosshairs of this battle, going back and forth on each side of it. And
it was around a 4-hour conflict. It would have there were between 200 to 300 casualties. So the Union forces had come out from Fort Gibson. There were 3,000 additional troops that were on their way, Confederate troops from Fort Smith, Arkansas, that were on their way to Honey Springs Depot, which was a Confederate depot at the time. They were planning to combine those troops to 9,000 and then from this area take over Fort Gibson. And of course the Union troops, they only had 3,000 at Fort Gibson, which they had taken over back in April of 1863. So General Blunt, Union forces, realized through spies and informants that this was about to happen, and he ordered his troops to on a night march starting on July 15th, 1863, where they crossed the Arkansas River on flatboats and make their way to what is Trail 1 of our battlefield on July 17th, 1863 at 8 o'clock in the morning. Whichever side controlled Fort Gibson pretty much controlled the Texas Road and the Arkansas River, which, as you can imagine, would be where all the supplies, men, goods, everything you can think of where they would need to travel through to take these things and And so that's why Fort Gibson was so important. I know the Union forces had gotten word of the Union victories in the east and the west, as we previously discussed. The Confederate officers would have known about that as well. So I think in addition to that, broadly speaking, they had more reason, both sides had more reason to be on the offensive, and I think that's what ultimately for the Confederates, they said, okay, we need to do this. Plus, the Union had entered Indian Territory for the second time in 1863, and so, you know, they'd made a push, and the Confederate forces realized this, and they needed to take Fort Gibson. So Elk Creek is where a lot of the hand-to-hand north of Elk Creek and south of Elk Creek is where a lot of the hand-to-hand combat would have taken place. And you can see that on Primitive 3, that area north of the creek where that would have taken place. But the soldiers on both sides were literally using the butts of their guns as clubs. And just about as anything you can imagine probably would have happened. And they were fighting for their ways of life. They were fighting for their freedoms. They were fighting for their lives. And that's what's so important to understand. You can stand right there where that happened. And approximately, there were 200 to 300 casualties. So you had hundreds of, a couple hundred deaths here, and a lot of that would have happened right there north of Elk Creek.
The site here, what measures have you guys are taking to preserve the history of the battle? Well,
we have a brand new, we have a new visitor center, 7,000 square foot visitor center. We have an immersive exhibit that details the history, a new documentary, and also it really reveals the diversity of the battle, I believe, and we've really tried to include that. And of course, the battlefield itself, preservation efforts have been taking place since the 1960s. And so in addition to taking care of the battlefield and building the new exhibits in the visitor center, now we're going to put on more programs and have more exhibits down the line. So we've got a lot of plans we're excited about. There's 6 walking trails, over 50 interpretive signs. If you were to spend a day out here, I would recommend coming to the visitor center first, watching the video, exploring the exhibits, and then probably take a good half day to walk all the trails, because there's probably around 4 miles of trails total, and over 50 interpretive signs. So there's a lot to see here.